No ship appeared on the
Apex,
scanners.
come in. It
No
is happening,
hyperspace
just like you
signature
predicted.
registered. Yet something fell from the void between stars, leaving only questions and the dread of impossible technology in its wake. New Chicago's skyline glittered beneath a sheet of cold autumn stars. The towers of the 25th century, rising in clean, curved lines over the bones of the old city below. It was the kind of night Buck Rogers still hadn't gotten used to, 2 years removed from the ice that had kept him frozen for 500 years. He stood on the observation deck of the Earth Defense Directorate's orbital relay station, a steaming cup of synth coffee in hand, watching the stars the way a man watches an old photograph, familiar, but not quite right anymore. Then the stars went out. Not all of them. Just a patch low on the eastern horizon, a smear of black swallowing a dozen points of light one by one, like ink spreading across a star chart. Buck set down his cup. "Tell me you're seeing that," he said into the calm. Dr. Elias Hewer's voice crackled back, sharp with the particular alarm of a man who had spent his life expecting an attack from Earth's enemies and never once considered the sky itself might betray them. "Scanners show nothing. No mass, no thermal signature, no radiation." "Buck, there's nothing there." "There's something there, document. I can see it blotting out Orion's belt right now." The Directorate's sensor net, built to track the last scattered remnants of the old Mongol war machines, the rogue satellites, the occasional asteroid wandering too close, had never been built to see something that didn't want to be seen. And the thing eclipsing the stars over Earth was not interested in being seen. It came down slow, ponderous, a wedge of dark metal kilometers long, running lights blinking on only once it had settled into low orbit like a predator deciding it no longer needed to hide. Buck had flown against pirate cruisers, defended New Chicago from raiders out of the asteroid belt, traded shots with rogue AI war drones left over from the old conflicts. He knew the silhouette of a warship. This was not that. This was something else entirely. A flying cathedral of gray steel, bristling with weapon batteries, utterly indifferent to Earth's notion of what a starship should look like. "Buck," Hewer's voice again, tighter now. "Whatever that is, it's deploying smaller craft. Multiple contacts, breaking off and heading for the surface. Trajectory says New Chicago." Buck was already moving. He'd come to the 25th century the hard way, frozen in a malfunctioning NASA capsule somewhere over the Pacific, drifting through 5 centuries of silence, until a Directorate salvage team cracked him out of the ice like a man being born a second time. He remembered the disorientation of that first year. A world rebuilt twice over from the wars that had nearly ended it, where rocket belts replaced cars and a fragile alliance of city-states called itself humanity's last best government. He'd learned to fly their ships, fight with their weapons, navigate the politics of a species that had clawed its way back from extinction more than once. He had never expected to do it all again. Not like this. The Directorate war room was already in chaos by the time he arrived. Hewer hunched over a hollow display showing the descent trajectories of what the sensors were now calling, with grim understatement, unidentified hostile craft multiple. General Marcus Okoye, commander of Earth's thin defense fleet, was barking orders into 3 comm channels at once. "Sir." Buck pushed through the crowd of technicians. "What do we know?" "Less than nothing," Okoye snapped. "That ship up there is bigger than anything in our fleet combined. And these," he jabbed a finger at the hollow, where 6 smaller craft were now visible, sleek and predatory, dropping toward the city in tight formation. "These aren't drones. They're crewed, armed, and they are not responding to any hailing frequency we've tried. So we don't know if they're hostile," Buck said. "They came armed and silent," Okoye said. "I'm not in the business of giving the benefit of the doubt to silence." Buck didn't argue. He'd seen enough of the old war's scars on this planet to understand the instinct. But something in him, the part that had survived 500 years of nothing by trusting his own eyes over other men's fear, wanted to see for himself before the first shot was fired. He got his chance 40 minutes later, in the rubble-strewn districts at the edge of New Chicago's reconstruction zone, where the smaller craft had touched down in a clearing between half-rebuilt towers. Buck arrived on a borrowed Directorate skimmer, rocket pack strapped to his back, sidearm holstered, and stopped cold at the sight in the clearing. They didn't look like raiders. They didn't look like anything Earth had ever produced. White armor, featureless black visor helmets, rifles unlike any blaster pattern in the Directorate Armory. The figures moved with drilled, mechanical precision, fanning out from their landing craft in disciplined formation, scanning the ruins with the cold efficiency of soldiers who had done this 1,000 times on 1,000 other worlds. One of them turned, the black visor fixed on Buck. Halt. Identify yourself and your function within this installation. The voice was flat, filtered, utterly without curiosity about the man standing in the wreckage, who clearly belonged to no army they recognized. Buck raised his hand slowly, rocket pack thrumming faint and ready at his back. Captain William Rogers, Earth Defense Directorate. He kept his voice level, even as his mind raced through a dozen questions that had no good answers. Installation. They'd called New Chicago an installation, like it was a base, not a city. Like this whole planet was a line item on someone's tactical map. This is Earth, my world. You want to tell me who you are, and why you're walking through my city like you already own it. The trooper's posture shifted, some unreadable calculation passing behind that black visor. This designation does not correspond to any registered system within Imperial territory. A pause, and Buck would have sworn, if a voice modulator could carry suspicion, that it had crept in. You will be detained for processing. Cooperate, and no harm will come to you. 6 rifles rose in near-perfect unison. Buck had been many things across 2 lifetimes, lived 5 centuries apart, a pilot, a soldier, a man without a home twice over. He had never once, in either life, been very good at cooperating with the business end of a gun. Yeah, he said, already moving. I don't think I will. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The first shot lit up the ruins of New Chicago like the dawn of a war nobody on Earth had asked for, and somewhere far above, in the cold dark of orbit, a fleet that didn't yet know it had stumbled onto a world that wouldn't go quietly took its first true measure of the man who would make sure of it. The first shot from Buck's blaster caught the lead trooper square in the chest plate, throwing him backward into the rubble. And that was all it took for the clearing to erupt. Blaster fire crisscrossed the ruined district in red and white streaks, troopers fanning out into the cover of broken concrete with the same drilled precision they'd used to disembark. Buck hit his rocket pack's ignition and rolled sideways through the air, the scream of his thrusters lost beneath the sharper, stranger crack of Imperial blasters. A sound unlike anything Earth's weapons made, higher pitched, hungrier. He came down behind a collapsed pillar, breathing hard, doing the math on 6 armed soldiers, 1 borrowed skimmer, and a rocket pack with maybe 4 minutes of fuel left. Not great odds. He'd flown into worse. "Here, you copy," he barked into his comm, ducking as a blast chipped stone inches from his head. "I've got 6 hostiles, heavy armor, weapons I don't recognize. They called New Chicago an installation. They think this whole planet is somebody's lost outpost." Static, then Hure's voice strained. "Buck, Okoye's mobilizing a response team, but it'll be 20 minutes before anyone reaches you. Can you hold?" "Make it 15, Buck said, "and I'll consider it a personal favor." He'd survived ambushes before, pirate raids in the asteroid belt, a running gunfight through the flooded ruins of Old Manhattan against rogue war drones that still thought the last war hadn't ended. What he hadn't survived, not yet, was anyone moving with this kind of cold, unbothered discipline. The troopers weren't panicking. They weren't even particularly trying, the way Buck read it, advancing in practiced 2-man cover formations, calling positions to each other in clipped jargon, treating a man with a rocket pack and a sidearm as a manageable inconvenience rather than a threat. That more than the strange weapons or the stranger armor was what told Buck exactly how far out of his depth he might be. He broke from cover in a burst of thruster fire, looping up and over the nearest trooper pair before they could track him, putting 2 shots through a gap in the rubble that sent one staggering. It wasn't going to be enough. He could already see more white armor moving at the tree line beyond the clearing. Reinforcements, methodical, unhurried, like men who'd never once needed to hurry in their lives. Then the sky tore open above him. Buck had a half second to register the screaming descent of an EDD interceptor, Not the response team, too fast, too alone, before the ship's twin cannons raked the Imperial position with plasma fire, scattering troopers and tearing a smoking trench through the ruined street. The interceptor banked hard, impossibly tight, and set down in the clearing with a scream of repulsors. The cockpit hissed open. A woman in a directorate flight suit leaned out, dark hair pulled back, a scar through one eyebrow that said this wasn't her first unauthorized solo run. "You Rogers," she shouted over the chaos. "Depends who's asking," Buck said, sprinting for the ship as blaster fire chewed up the ground behind him. "Captain Wilma Deering. I heard a man on an open channel arguing with an army by himself, and figured I'd come see if the stories about you were true." She jerked her head at the second seat. "Get in before I decide they're not." Buck didn't need to be told twice. He vaulted into the gunner's seat as Deering's hands flew across the controls, the interceptor lurching skyward even as a fresh volley of Imperial fire scorched past the canopy. "Where to?" she shouted. "Up," Buck said, twisting in his seat to track the retreating troopers below, already regrouping with that same maddening calm. "I want to see what we're actually dealing with before this gets worse." Deering didn't argue. The interceptor screamed upward through New Chicago's skyline, climbing toward the high atmosphere, where the true shape of the threat finally came into view, and Buck felt something cold settle in his chest at the sight of it. The wedge-shaped warship hung in orbit like a mountain range that had learned to fly, kilometers of gray hull bristling with batteries that dwarfed anything in Earth's entire fleet. Smaller craft swarmed around it in disciplined patrol patterns, fighters, shuttles, things Buck had no names for. It wasn't a raiding party. It wasn't an exploratory mission. It was a military presence, vast and unbothered, the kind of force that didn't come to negotiate because it had never needed to. "That's not possible," Deering breathed, banking the interceptor into a shadowed orbital lane to avoid the patrol patterns. "Nothing in the solar system has resources like that. Nothing human does." "It's not ours," Buck said quietly. "It's not anybody's I've ever heard of. And I've been around longer than I look." Deering shot him a sideways glance, the kind that said she'd heard the rumors about the frozen man from the old world and hadn't decided yet whether to believe them, then returned her attention to the controls as a proximity alarm chimed. "We've got a fighter breaking formation," she said. "Looks like it's seen us." Through the canopy, Buck watched a sleek, twin-winged craft peel away from the warship's flank and arc toward them, moving with a speed and grace that put every interceptor in Earth's fleet to shame. "Can you outrun that?" Buck asked. "I don't know," Deering admitted. "I've never had to outrun anything built by someone who isn't us." The strange fighter opened fire, twin bolts of green light screaming past the canopy close enough that Buck felt the heat through the hull, and any question of who would speak first, who would negotiate, who would extend the benefit of the doubt, burned away in that instant like fog under a rising sun. "Then I guess," Buck said, already reaching for the gunner controls, "we're about to find out." Deering threw the interceptor into a spiraling dive, and the alien fighter screamed past overhead, close enough that Buck caught a flash of its silhouette, twin-winged, angular, fast in a way that made Earth's best engineering look like a child's toy. He didn't have time to admire it. He had time to fire. His shots caught the fighter's wing as it looped back for another pass, and for one absurd second Buck thought he'd actually hit something that mattered, until the fighter shrugged off the impact and kept coming, weapons hot, untroubled. "It's not slowing down," Deering shouted, juking the interceptor hard to starboard. "Then let's give it a reason to," Buck said, and put 3 more shots into its flank as it overshot them. This time something caught, a stutter in its flight path, a thin trail of smoke unspooling from one wing. Not a kill, a warning. The fighter peeled off, banking back toward the warship rather than pressing the advantage, and Buck allowed himself half a breath of relief before Deering's voice cut through it, tight and urgent. "Buck, it's hailing us. Put it through." The voice that came over the comm was clipped, accented in a way Buck had never heard, carrying the particular flatness of a man reading from a script he'd recited 1,000 times to 1,000 different worlds. Asterisk unidentified craft, you have engaged Imperial forces. Stand down and prepare to be boarded, or you will be destroyed. Asterisk. Buck keyed the comm before Deering could answer. This is Captain William Rogers, Earth Defense Directorate. You're the one who dropped armed troops into my city without so much as a hello. You want to explain yourselves, or are we just trading shots until somebody runs out of luck?" A pause. Longer than Buck expected. When the voice returned, something in its flatness had shifted, not quite uncertainty, but close enough that Buck noticed. Asterisk, this system does not appear in any Imperial register. Designation Earth is unrecognized. You will surrender your vessel for inspection. Asterisk. Yeah. Buck said, "I caught that part the first time your friend said it. Here's the thing, this is my planet. Nobody's registered it because nobody's ever needed to ask anybody's permission to live here. So however big that ship of yours is, you're going to have a hard time convincing 11 billion people there's suddenly somebody's unregistered colony." Deering shot him a look somewhere between alarm and admiration. The comm crackled, then cut entirely, and the fighter, still trailing smoke, banked away and climbed back toward the warship without another word. "That's not a good sign," Deering said. "No," Buck agreed. "That's a man going to report to somebody with a bigger desk." 40 minutes later, in the underground war room beneath the Directorate's New Chicago headquarters, Buck stood before a wall of holo displays while Dr. Huer and General Okoye argued in the particular tight, controlled voices of men trying not to panic in front of their own staff. "That ship has weapons batteries that could glass this entire city from orbit," Okoye said, jabbing a finger at the slowly rotating image of the wedge-shaped warship, now confirmed via long-range scan and looking no less impossible up close. "Our entire fleet combined couldn't put a scratch on something that size." "Then we don't fight it ship to ship," Huer said. "We talk. We find out what they want. We negotiate. We negotiate with an army that opened with armed troops on the ground." Okoye shook his head. "Marcus, they didn't send an ambassador. They sent soldiers." Buck had been quiet through most of it, turning over the strange flatness in that fighter pilot's voice, the way the word unregistered had hung in the air like an accusation. "They didn't come here looking for a fight," he said finally. Both men turned to him. "Not really. Think about it, 6 troopers and 1 fighter. Against a planet this size? That's not an invasion force. That's a patrol that stumbled onto something they weren't expecting and don't know what to do with." "That's a generous read of a man who pointed a gun at your face," Okoye said. "Maybe, but it's the read that gives us room to work with." Buck stepped closer to the display. "Whoever they are, they didn't know Earth existed. That ship up there isn't here because of us. It's lost. Maybe an accident. Maybe something went wrong with however they get from one star to another. That doesn't make them less dangerous. But it means they're operating without a plan, and people without a plan make mistakes." Huer rubbed his temples. "So what do you suggest? We can't outgun them. We can't outrun whatever brought them here." "No," Buck admitted. "But we can make them decide we're not worth the trouble." Or, he hesitated, weighing the next words carefully, because he knew exactly how they'd land in a room full of soldiers who'd just watched their city get walked into uninvited. "We find someone over there willing to tell us what we're actually dealing with before we commit to a war we can't win blind." Okoye's jaw tightened. "You're talking about contact. Negotiation. I'm talking about not getting 11 billion people killed because we were too proud to ask questions first," Buck said. "I've done the proud, shoot first thing before, General. It works right up until it doesn't." The room fell quiet. Outside, faint through the reinforced walls, the city went on with its ordinary, fragile rhythms, utterly unaware that 2 factions, one of them 5 centuries beyond anything Buck had known, and the other from somewhere far stranger still, were about to decide its fate based on whether pride or pragmatism won out first. Huer finally broke the silence. "If we're going to gamble on talk, we need to know who we're talking to. And we need a way to reach them that won't get our messenger shot out of the sky before they finish the first sentence." Buck thought of the fighter pilot's voice, that flat, rehearsed authority cracking, just slightly, at the unfamiliar word Earth. "I might know a way," he said slowly, "but you're not going to like it." What Buck proposed, 20 minutes later, had Okoye on his feet and Huer pressing both palms flat against the briefing table as though the gesture alone might keep the plan from happening. "You want to fly directly at their warship," Okoye said. Alone, in an unarmed shuttle, broadcasting on an open channel. And just talk to them. I want to fly at them looking like exactly what I am, Buck said. One man. No weapons platform big enough to read as a threat. If they're as disciplined as that ground patrol looked, they won't waste a capital ship's batteries on a single unarmed contact. Discipline cuts both ways. It means they follow procedure. And procedure usually has room in it for talking before shooting. Usually, Hur repeated. I've bet on worse odds. Buck managed a thin smile. 500 years frozen in a tin can taught me something about trusting that the universe occasionally lets a man finish his sentence before it kills him. In the end, it wasn't Buck's gambling instincts that carried the argument. It was Deering, leaning against the doorway with her arms crossed, who tipped the room. I'll fly him, she said. Unarmed shuttle. My hands on the stick. If it goes wrong, it's my mistake to make, not an order anybody gave. Okoye looked like a man swallowing something bitter, but he nodded. You have 1 hour. After that, I'm scrambling everything we've got, and God help us all. The shuttle climbed out of New Chicago's atmosphere with Buck in the cockpit beside Deering, running lights dimmed, every weapon system stripped from the craft's manifest before launch, so that anyone scanning them would see exactly what they were. Unarmed, alone, and very obviously not a threat. The warship grew from a distant shadow into a wall of gray steel that swallowed the horizon. Batteries Buck could now see were each individually larger than the shuttle he sat in. He felt Deering's hand tighten on the controls beside him and didn't blame her. Imperial vessel, Buck said into the open comm, voice steady despite the hammering of his own pulse. This is Captain William Rogers, Earth Defense Directorate, approaching unarmed under flag of parley. I'd like to speak with whoever's in charge. Silence stretched long enough that Buck began composing, in his head, several versions of how badly this could end. Then a new voice came through, older, measured, carrying none of the troopers' flat recitation. This was a man accustomed to being listened to. Asterisk, this is Moff Tarnisvey, commanding officer of the Imperial Task Force Harrow's Reach. You are either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish, Captain Rogers, approaching my vessel without escort or weapon. Asterisk. Where I'm from, Buck said, we call that an opening move, not a mistake. A pause, and Buck thought, though it was hard to tell through the comm's distortion, that there had been the faintest edge of amusement in it. Asterisk, you have 5 minutes, Captain. I would not waste them. Asterisk. Then I'll get right to it, Buck said. Your people called my planet unregistered. Said it doesn't appear on any chart you carry. I believe you, because near as I can tell, you don't belong on any chart I'd recognize either. So before this turns into a war neither of us can afford, I want to know, where did you come from? And how did you end up here? There was a longer silence this time, long enough that Deering shot Buck a worried glance. When Moff Vey's voice returned, it had lost some of its measured calm. That is an Imperial military matter, Captain, not a subject for negotiation with. A pause, as though the man were searching for a word that fit asterisk, with whatever this world represents. Asterisk. With respect, Moff Vey, your ship is sitting in my sky, and your soldiers shot at my people in my city before either of us said a single word to the other. I'd say that makes it everybody's business. Buck kept his voice level, refusing the bait of the Moff's clear irritation. I'm not here to threaten you. I don't have the ships to back it up even if I wanted to, and we both know it. I'm here because I think you're as lost as we are confused, and two lost parties shooting at each other in the dark usually just means more bodies for no good reason. The silence this time felt different, considering rather than offended. Buck pressed the advantage. You said your task force, not your fleet, not your armada. A task force that ends up somewhere that isn't on any of your charts sounds to me like an accident, not an invasion. Am I wrong? You are not entirely wrong, Captain, Moff Vey said at last, the words clipped and reluctant, as though each one cost him something. Asterisk, my task force was engaged in long-range reconnaissance through irregular space, when our navigational systems failed catastrophically. We emerged in this system with no record of how we arrived, nor any confirmed means of returning. Asterisk. Buck felt something in his chest loosen, just slightly, not relief, not yet, but the first thread of a path forward. Then we've got a problem in common. You're stranded somewhere you don't understand, surrounded by people you don't recognize. And I imagine that makes your superiors back wherever you came from a question you'd rather not have to answer poorly. Asterisk. You presume a great deal about Imperial command structure, Captain. Asterisk. I presume that any organization big enough to build a ship like yours has people in it who don't like surprises, Buck said. And right now, you are the surprise. That's not a comfortable position for a man with your rank. I'm guessing. The silence that followed was the longest yet. When Moffey spoke again, the measured calm had returned, but something beneath it had shifted. Recalculated, recategorized, Buck and his strange, unregistered world now filed under a heading other than threat or target. Asterisk, you have given me a great deal to consider, Captain Rogers. I will grant you this, a temporary cessation of hostilities, pending further assessment of your world's nature and capabilities. Do not mistake this for trust. It is merely the absence, for now, of certainty in either direction. Asterisk. I'll take it, Buck said. The calm cut. Deering exhaled slowly, the shuttle's controls trembling faintly under hands that had been clenched too tight for too long. You actually talked our way out of an orbital bombardment, she said, half disbelief, half something closer to awe. For now, Buck said, watching the vast gray hull recede as Deering brought the shuttle around toward Earth's blue curve. Man like that doesn't strike me as someone who stays uncertain for long. We bought time, Wilma, not peace. Behind them, deep within the Harrow's reach, Moff Tarnis Vase stood at his viewport, studying the unfamiliar blue world below, already composing, in the careful architecture of his mind, the report he would need to send the moment his communications array found a way to reach Imperial Center. A report that would have to explain, somehow, an undiscovered world full of people who spoke to star destroyers as though they were equals. He did not yet know whether that made them fools, or something far more dangerous. Moff Tarnis Vey had not risen to his rank by trusting first impressions, and he trusted Captain William Rogers's least of all. The cessation of hostilities held through the first day, and through it Vey watched Earth. This designation, he reminded himself, refusing yet to grant the world the dignity of a name he'd accept without verification, with the patient, clinical attention of a man who had built a career on finding the lie beneath a convenient story. Recalibrate the long-range scanners, he told Lieutenant Hask, his aide, as the two of them studied the slow rotation of the blue world on the bridge's main viewport. I want full atmospheric and orbital telemetry, population density, industrial output, military deployment patterns. If this world is what Rogers claims, an isolated, unregistered civilization with no knowledge of the wider galaxy, the data will show it plainly. And if it isn't, sir? Then Captain Rogers is a far better liar than his manner suggests, Vey said. And this world is exactly the kind of forgotten separatist holdout or rebel cell our charts have failed to register. Either answer is useful to me. I intend to have both ruled in or out before I commit this task force to any further restraint. It was, Vey told himself, simple due diligence, the kind any competent officer would exercise. But beneath the procedural language, something else gnawed at him, a discomfort he would not have admitted to Hask, nor to anyone above him in the chain of command he could not currently reach. He had spent 11 years climbing the Imperial hierarchy on a foundation of certainty, every world catalogued, every threat quantified, every variable accounted for. Earth defied that foundation simply by existing, a planet of 11 billion souls, by Rogers's own claim, that no Imperial survey had ever charted. It was either an impossibility or proof that the galaxy was larger and stranger than even the Empire's reach. Neither possibility sat comfortably with a man who had built his career on certainty. The scans, when they came back hours later, only deepened the unease. Earth's technology was a strange patchwork, primitive by Imperial standards in some respects, startlingly advanced in others, as though the civilization below had rebuilt itself piecemeal from some catastrophic setback and never quite achieved a coherent whole. Rocket-propelled personal flight systems alongside crude energy weapons. Orbital relay stations with no apparent military application. A single fragile-looking defense fleet that Vey's tactical officers dismissed, almost unanimously, as no threat at all. Sir, Hask's voice carried a note of genuine puzzlement. There's no evidence of separatist infrastructure. No droid manufacturing signatures, no Trade Federation markers, nothing matching any known faction profile. If this is a hidden base, it's hidden behind an entire functioning planetary civilization that doesn't appear to know it's hiding anything. Curious, Vey murmured, though curious did not capture the particular cold unease settling into his chest. He had come looking for a lie to expose. He was finding, instead, the unsettling shape of a truth he had no framework to process. A world entirely outside the galaxy he understood, populated by people who had no concept of the Empire at all. That should have reassured him. It did not. A man uncertain of the shape of the universe around him does not relax. He searches harder for the lie, because the alternative, that there is no lie, only a gap in his own understanding vast enough to swallow everything he believed he knew, is far less bearable. Increase reconnaissance flights over the population centers, Vey ordered. Quietly. I want confirmation, not assumption. And signal Rogers. I wish to continue our conversation. There is more I require him to explain. Buck received the summons in the Directorate War Room, where Okoye had spent the better part of a day pacing a groove into the floor, and Huer had buried himself in increasingly frantic analysis of every scrap of Imperial technology their long-range sensors could parse. He wants to talk again, Buck said, reading the message twice to be sure. Same terms. Unarmed approach, open channel. Or it's a trap this time, Okoye said. He's had a full day to study us. Maybe he's decided we're worth less trouble dead than alive. Maybe, Buck allowed. But I don't think that's it. He set the message down, turning it over in his mind alongside everything he'd heard in Vey's voice during their first exchange, the careful, measured calm of a man performing certainty he didn't fully possess. I think he's rattled. A man like that doesn't survive in whatever army he serves by not having an answer for everything. And right now we're the one thing on his books that doesn't have an answer. Huer looked up from his data slate, intrigued despite himself. You think his uncertainty is something we can use? I think it's the only leverage we've got, Buck said. He's not going to respect a fight we can't win. But a man that uncertain might respect the truth, if it's delivered plainly enough that lying about it stops being worth the effort. He glanced toward the hollow display, where the Harrow's reach hung in its slow orbit, patient and immense. I'm going back up there. And this time, I think it's worth bringing someone who can speak to exactly how unprepared we are for a fight, because I have a hunch that honesty's going to land harder with him than another round of posturing. Okoye's jaw tightened, but after a long moment, he nodded. Deering flies you again. And Buck, he paused, choosing the words with visible reluctance. If he's testing us, find out what he's testing for. We can't plan around a threat we don't understand. That, Buck said, already heading for the door, makes two of us. Behind him, far above the slow-turning curve of the earth, Moff Tarnis Vey stood once more at his viewport, watching the world he could not yet categorize and turning over, with the meticulous unease of a man who has built his entire identity on certainty. The growing and unwelcome suspicion that this single unregistered planet might be the first thing in his career he could not simply solve. The second meeting took place not over open comm, but face-to-face, a concession Buck hadn't expected, and one that told him more about Moff Vey's state of mind than any words could. A shuttle bay aboard the Harrow's Reach had been cleared and secured, a contingent of stormtroopers flanking the boarding ramp, when Deering brought their craft down inside the vast docking bay. Buck stepped out into air that smelled faintly of recycled ozone and machine oil, the cavernous bay dwarfing anything Earth had built in the 5 centuries since his first long sleep. Moff Tarnis Vey stood waiting near the foot of the ramp, flanked by Lieutenant Hask and 2 more guards, his gray uniform immaculate, his expression unreadable. Captain Rogers. Vey's voice in person carried the same measured calm as over the comm, though up close Buck could see the faint tightness at the corners of his eyes. A man running on too little sleep and too much uncertainty. You continue to surprise me. Few beings I have encountered walk willingly into the heart of a vessel capable of annihilating their entire civilization. Few beings I've encountered bother inviting a man to dinner before they annihilate him, Buck said. I figure that buys me the benefit of the doubt a while longer. Something flickered behind Vay's composure, not quite a smile, but its distant cousin. Walk with me, Captain. They moved through the ship's corridors, stormtroopers trailing at a respectful distance, and Buck took in everything he could without making the staring too obvious. Banks of unfamiliar machinery, officers in gray uniforms who paused mid-stride to track the unfamiliar visitor with poorly hidden curiosity. The sheer scale of a vessel built to project power across distances Buck couldn't begin to comprehend. My scans of your world, Vay said finally, have produced no evidence of any known galactic faction. No separatist infrastructure. No rebel cells. No indication that your civilization possesses any awareness of the wider galaxy at all. He paused at a viewport overlooking the curve of Earth, blue and achingly familiar even from this impossible vantage. This presents me with a difficulty, Captain. The empire I serve does not encounter worlds that exist entirely outside its knowledge. Such a thing should not be possible. And yet, Buck said, here we both are. Indeed. Vay's hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man composing himself before delivering something difficult. I will be candid with you, Captain, because I have found you to value candor, and because I no longer see the use in pretending otherwise. My task force's navigational failure was not a minor malfunction. We do not know how we arrived in this system. We do not know how to leave it. Every hour that passes without contact from Imperial Center is an hour in which my superiors will begin to assume this task force lost, and an Imperial task force presumed lost is, eventually, an Imperial task force written off. Buck absorbed that, turning it over for the weight it carried. You're telling me you're as stranded as we'd be if your ship vanished tomorrow. I'm telling you, Vay said, that I command 4,000 soldiers and crew, none of whom chose to be marooned in an unregistered system at the edge of explored space, and that my options are growing narrower with each passing day. He turned from the viewport to face Buck directly. I could continue to treat your world as a potential threat to be neutralized, the safe, doctrinally sound conclusion, given the uncertainty. Or I could consider an alternative I am not accustomed to considering, which is that a world with no concept of the Empire, no allegiance to any faction I recognize, might represent something other than a threat to be catalogued. Vay's voice carried the careful weight of a man speaking past the edges of his training. A resource, perhaps, or, at minimum, a population unlikely to resist integration as forcefully as a galaxy-aware world might. The words landed cold in Buck's chest, and he understood, suddenly and completely, exactly what kind of man he'd been negotiating with. Not a villain reaching for his blaster at the first opportunity. Something more patient and, in its way, more dangerous. A man for whom integration was simply the natural, inevitable end point of any encounter, dressed in language soft enough to make conquest sound like administration. You're talking about occupy my planet, Buck said quietly, and calling it a solution to your navigation problem. I am talking about survival, Captain. Mine, and should you choose wisely, yours as well. Vay's tone remained level, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. 11 billion people, by your own account, with no defense fleet capable of meaningful resistance, and no allies beyond your own atmosphere. I could requisition this world's resources, its labor, its strategic position, and report to Imperial Center not a failure, but a discovery, an unregistered system brought under Imperial authority through my task force's resourcefulness. That account serves me considerably better than admitting we are lost and adrift. Buck felt the careful diplomacy of the past 2 days curdle into something sharper. And if Earth doesn't want to be your discovery, then I would be forced to demonstrate why resistance would be unwise, Vay said, which I would genuinely prefer to avoid, Captain. I have found you intelligent, and I suspect you understand the mathematics of this situation better than your General Okoye does. For 1,000 soldiers, an orbital position your fleet cannot challenge, and weapons technology your civilization has no answer for. This need not be violent. It need only be accepted. The corridor seemed to close in around Buck, The weight of the Harrow's reach's vastness no longer impressive, but oppressive. A physical manifestation of exactly how outmatched Earth truly was. He thought of New Chicago's skyline, of Huer's careful optimism, of Okoye's grim readiness to fight a battle Earth couldn't win. He thought of every world, in every history he'd half-learned across 2 lifetimes, that had once been told occupation was simply the reasonable alternative to destruction. "I've heard that speech before," Buck said, and his voice had gone quiet and hard in a way that made even Vay's composed expression flicker. Different century, different uniform, same math. It never ends with accepted. It ends with people deciding being conquered quietly is somehow better than dying loudly, right up until they realize quiet conquest costs just as much. It just takes longer to notice. Vay studied him for a long moment, something unreadable, moving, behind his composed features. "You would choose destruction over administration, Captain, for a world that cannot possibly win." "I'd choose finding out exactly how unwinnable it is," Buck said, "before I hand you 11 billion people on the strength of your math alone." He held the Moff's gaze, refusing to be the one who looked away first. "You said it yourself. You don't know how you got here, and you don't know how to leave. That makes you just as stuck as us. I don't think a man that's stuck gets to dictate terms like he's already won." For the first time since their conversation began, Moff Tarnis Vay did not have an immediate answer. The silence between them stretched long enough that Buck could hear the faint hum of the Harrow's reach-S systems through the deck plating, a sound he'd come to associate, in just 2 short meetings, with the patient indifference of a machine built to outlast empires of its own. Moff Vay's eyes remained fixed on him, unreadable, the calculations behind them unhurried even now. "You are gambling a great deal on a hunch, Captain," Vay said at last. "That I will not simply order this conversation concluded and proceed with the demonstration I described." "I'm gambling that you're smarter than that," Buck said. "A man who wanted to skip straight to conquest wouldn't have spent 2 days asking questions first. You're not looking for an excuse to level my planet, Moff Vay. You're looking for the safest way out of a hole you didn't dig." Something shifted behind Vay's composed expression. Not agreement, not yet, but the particular flicker of a man who has been read more accurately than he is comfortable admitting. He turned and resumed walking, and after a moment's hesitation, Buck fell into step beside him, the stormtrooper escort trailing at a respectful distance through corridors that hummed with quiet, disciplined activity. "Tell me something, Captain," Vay said. "In this 500 years you claim to have slept through, what did you find when you woke? A galaxy unchanged or one unrecognizable?" The question caught Buck off guard, not hostile, not strategic, simply curious in a way that felt almost human beneath the uniform. "Unrecognizable," he admitted. "The world I knew tore itself apart twice over before the Directorate managed to build something that could hold together. Cities I remembered were dust. Governments I'd grown up under were just stories old men told their grandchildren. I had to learn to be a person again from scratch, in a world that had already decided who it was going to be without asking me." "And yet you stand here," Vay observed, "advocating for that world's right to remain unconquered, unintegrated, undecided by anyone but itself." "Because I know what it costs a people to have that choice taken away from them," Buck said. "I lived through Earth losing pieces of itself to wars nobody won. I'm not interested in watching it lose the rest to a war it never had a chance to fight." Vay was quiet for several paces. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its careful diplomatic polish, replaced by something raw. A man, however briefly, speaking plainly rather than strategically. "I have served the Empire for 23 years, Captain. I have overseen the pacification of frontier worlds, the suppression of insurrections, the administration of populations who did not ask for imperial governance, and received it regardless. I have told myself every time that order imposed is preferable to chaos endured, that the Empire's hand, however heavy, prevents a heavier one from elsewhere." "And do you believe that?" Buck asked. "I have found it useful to believe," Vay said, which was, Buck understood, as close to an admission as the man was likely to offer. "But I will tell you what I have not encountered in 23 years, Captain. A world that looked at the Empire's full might, arrayed openly above it, and did not immediately fracture into factions arguing over the terms of its own surrender. Your General Okoye wishes to fight a war he cannot win. Your Dr. Hure, I am told, wishes to negotiate a peace he cannot guarantee. And you simply continue walking into the heart of my ship, asking me to be better than the uniform I wear. Is it working? Buck asked. Vey almost laughed, a short, surprised sound quickly suppressed, as though laughter itself were a tactical vulnerability he could not afford to display. I do not know yet, Captain. That is the most honest answer I can offer you. They emerged onto an observation gantry overlooking one of the ship's secondary hangars, where TIE fighters sat in neat ranks, their pilots moving through pre-flight checks with the same drilled, unhurried precision Buck had seen in the ground troopers 2 days before. He understood, looking at it, exactly what kind of machine he was negotiating with, not a single man's cruelty, but an institution so vast and so practiced that cruelty had become simply procedure, indistinguishable from competence. I want to propose something, Buck said. Not surrender, not war. Something in between that might actually get both our people through this, without anyone having to bury a generation over it. Vey's eyebrow lifted slightly. I am listening. You need a way home, or at least a way to prove to whoever you answer to that you handled this situation well, whatever handled ends up meaning. We need time to understand what you actually are, time to decide as a planet what we want our future to look like, instead of having it decided for us at the point of a gun. Buck turned to face him fully. What if I help you? Not your conquest, your navigation problem. My world's astronomers, our scientists, anyone with knowledge of the anomaly that brought you here, we put them to work figuring out what happened, and whether it can be reversed. In exchange, you hold your forces here. No ground occupation, no resource requisition, no demonstration of strength. Just patience, while both of us solve a problem neither of us asked for. Vey studied him with new attention, the calculation behind his eyes shifting visibly into a different register. You would offer Imperial forces your world's full scientific cooperation on the strength of a promise that I will not simply take what I want regardless. I'd offer it on the strength of you being smart enough to know that taking what you want by force against a planet with 11 billion people who will resist you in 1,000 ways you can't predict costs you a lot more than waiting a few weeks for a solution that gets you home with your task force intact and your record clean. Buck held his gaze. You said it yourself. Admitting you're lost costs you. But going home with a navigational anomaly solved and a new, cooperative world cataloged for future reference? That's not a failure report, Moff Vey. That's a win you can actually use. The silence that followed was the longest of their entire exchange. Below them, in the hangar, the TIE fighters continued their methodical preparations, oblivious to the negotiation unfolding above them that would determine whether they ever flew a mission over Earth's skies at all. There's a flaw in your proposal, Captain, Vey said finally. It requires me to trust that your scientists will work in earnest, rather than using the time I grant to prepare a resistance my task force cannot anticipate. There's a flaw in yours too, Buck said. It requires me to trust that the moment your scientists, or whoever you've got handling this, figure out the anomaly, you won't just take what you came for and burn the cooperation agreement along with it. Then we are at an impasse of mutual distrust, Vey said. Or, Buck said, we're two men who've both seen enough of how badly things go when nobody trusts anybody, and we're deciding whether we're tired enough of that pattern to try something else. Vey turned back to the viewport, his reflection ghosting faintly against the transparisteel, superimposed over the slow-turning curve of the world below, a world he had arrived above intending to categorize as either threat or resource, and found instead refused to fit cleanly into either box. I will grant you 14 days, Captain Rogers, he said at last. Your scientists will have full access to whatever sensor data my task force can safely share regarding the anomaly. In exchange, my forces will maintain their current posture. No ground deployment, no resource requisition, no further incident. But I want you to understand precisely what 14 days represents. It is the length of time I can delay reporting this task force's status to Imperial Center before that silence itself becomes the message. After that, Captain, this decision will no longer be entirely mine to make. Buck felt the weight of the deadline settle into his chest, sharp and immediate. 14 days to either solve an interdimensional anomaly his own world scientists had never imagined existed, or to prepare to either fight or fall to a power that made Earth's entire defense fleet look like a child's toy collection. 14 days, Buck repeated. We'll take it. I hope for both our sakes, Vay said quietly, that it is enough. As Buck made his way back toward the shuttle bay, escorted once more by silent stormtroopers, he found himself turning over the strange shape of the bargain he'd just struck, a piece built not on trust, but on the fragile, temporary alignment of two desperate men's self-interest. It would hold exactly as long as both sides found it more useful than the alternative. Buck had learned, across 2 lifetimes and 5 centuries of hard lessons, that useful was a far less stable foundation than either side wanted to admit. Somewhere below, in the quiet labs of the Directorate, Dr. Huer's team was about to receive the strangest research assignment in human history. And somewhere above, in the cold, disciplined heart of the Harrow's Reach, Lieutenant Hask was already composing the careful, sanitized report that would buy his commander 14 days of dangerous, deliberate silence. The 14-day clock had barely run 3 days when Buck first heard the rumor, a closed-door session of the Directorate Council, convened without Okoye's knowledge, and more pointedly, without his own. He heard it from Deering, who'd heard it from a flight tech, who'd heard it from someone in administrative services who probably shouldn't have been talking at all. By the time it reached Buck, the story had the second-hand shape of every rumor that turns out to be true. Councilwoman Theodora Marsh, head of New Chicago's Civilian Oversight Board, had requested a private channel to the Harrow's Reach, one that bypassed the Directorate's military command structure entirely. She wanted to talk to them directly, Deering said, pacing the cramped observation deck, where she and Buck had taken to meeting between briefings. Without Okoye, without you. She's been making the rounds with the other council members for 2 days, building support. Support for what exactly? For finding out what terms of surrender they'd accept, Deering said, before your 14 days run out and Vay decides patience isn't worth the trouble anymore. Buck felt something cold settle into his stomach, not quite betrayal, not yet, but its early warning sign. He understood the impulse, even as it angered him. Marsh and her allies on the council weren't traitors. They were frightened people doing the math on 11 billion lives against one warship's batteries, and arriving at a different answer than Buck had. That didn't make the answer right. It made it dangerous in a different way than Vay's army was dangerous, slower, quieter, and harder to fight because it wore the face of reasonable caution instead of conquest. I need to talk to her, Buck said. Buck. Deering caught his arm before he could leave. She's not going to listen to the man who's currently betting the whole planet's safety on an Imperial commander's good faith. From where she's sitting, you're the reckless one. Maybe I am, Buck admitted. But reckless isn't the same as wrong, and I'd rather argue that to her face than let her hand Earth over to Vay on his terms, before we've even had a chance to find out if there's a better one. Councilwoman Marsh received him in her office an hour later, her expression carrying the particular weary patience of a woman who had expected this confrontation and prepared for it accordingly. She was older than Okoye, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the wrong decision cost lives, and who had learned to live with that weight by trusting process over instinct. Captain Rogers. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. I assume you've heard what you've heard, and I assume you're here to tell me I'm wrong. I'm here to understand why you think you're right, Buck said, taking the seat. Before I decide how hard to argue against it. Marsh studied him for a long moment, then folded her hands atop a data slate covered in projections Buck didn't need to read closely to understand the shape of. 4 days ago, Captain, a warship larger than any structure on this planet appeared in our sky and demonstrated, within the hour, that it could end this civilization without meaningful resistance. You negotiated us 14 days of breathing room, and I am grateful for it, genuinely. But breathing room is not a strategy. It is a delay before the same conversation happens again, on worse terms, when your gamble on their navigational anomaly fails to pay off. It might not fail, Buck said. It might not succeed either, Marsh countered, and I am not willing to bet 11 billion lives on might. I have spent 3 days reviewing every scrap of intelligence Dr. Hewer's team has gathered on Imperial capability, and the conclusion is the same every time. We cannot win a war against that fleet. Not eventually. Not with time. Not ever. Barring some miracle neither of us can plan around. So my question to you, Captain, is simple. If we cannot win, why are we not negotiating the best possible terms for losing, while we still have something to negotiate with? It was, Buck had to admit, a question built on solid ground. He'd seen the same projections Hewer had compiled, the same brutal mathematics of Earth's defense fleet against the Harrow's Reach-S arsenal. Marsh wasn't wrong about the numbers. She was wrong, Buck believed, about what the numbers actually meant. I've met men like they before, Buck said. Different war, different century, but the same kind of calculation. A commander who'd rather find a clean solution than a costly one, because clean solutions look better in whatever report he's writing for whoever he answers to. Right now, Vade doesn't have a clean solution. He's lost, he's stranded, and he's worried about how that looks to his own command structure. That's leverage, Councilwoman. The moment you go around me and Okoye and offer him unconditional terms, you hand him exactly what he needs, a clean, quiet, easy solution that costs him nothing and gets him everything. You're not negotiating from strength. You're negotiating from panic, and men like they can smell the difference. Or, Marsh said quietly, I am negotiating from the simple recognition that pride has gotten more civilizations destroyed throughout history than caution ever has. You speak as though there is a version of this where Earth keeps its sovereignty intact and its people unharmed. I am not convinced that version exists, Captain. I think there is a version where we surrender enough, early enough, to keep what matters, our cities, our people, some shadow of self-governance, and a version where we hold out on hope and lose everything when the holding out runs out. Buck leaned forward. And what happens, Councilwoman? The day after you sign whatever terms Vay offers. You think occupation stops being occupation just because nobody fired shot to get there? I've seen what happens to people who get told that accepting control quietly is the responsible choice. It's never just one surrender. It's the first of many, each one justified by the last, until there's nothing left of what you were trying to protect in the first place. That is a fear, Captain, not a plan. It's both, Buck said. I'm not asking you to trust Vay or trust me blindly. I'm asking you to give the 14 days an honest chance to work before you spend the leverage we've got on a surrender nobody's forced us into yet. If Hewer's team can't crack the anomaly, if the deadline comes and goes with nothing to show for it, then fine, we talk about terms, and I'll be the first one in the room helping you find the least bad version of that conversation. But we're not there yet. And going around the people currently holding that fragile piece together, without even telling them you're doing it, isn't caution, Councilwoman. It's panic dressed up as wisdom. The office fell quiet. Outside, through the reinforced window, New Chicago's skyline carried on in its ordinary daily rhythms. 11 billion lives worth of routine, entirely unaware of how close the conversation in this room had come to deciding their future without their consent. Marsh finally exhaled, some of the rigid composure leaving her shoulders. You make a compelling argument, Captain. I will not pretend otherwise. But I want you to understand something in return. If your 14 days run out, and Vay's patience runs out alongside them, I will not wait for permission from you or General Okoye to act. I have a responsibility to this planet's people that does not bend to your faith in one Imperial officer's better nature. That's fair, Buck said. All I'm asking is that whatever happens, happens together. Not behind anybody's back. Not in a closed room nobody else gets to weigh in on. If we're going down, Councilwoman, we go down as one planet making one decision, not fractured into factions arguing over who gets to surrender first. Marsh studied him a long moment, then gave a slow, reluctant nod. I will bring this to the full council, openly this time. You have my word on that much, at least. She paused, something almost right touching the corner of her mouth. You are a strange man to have woken up into this century, Captain Rogers. Most people, given 500 years of sleep, would have learned to be more cautious, not less. Where I'm from, Buck said, rising from his chair, caution that costs you your freedom isn't caution at all. It's just surrender with better manners. He left her office with the immediate crisis defused, but the underlying fracture still very much intact. Earth's leadership divided not by malice, but by two equally reasonable readings of an impossible situation, each one capable of getting the planet killed if it won out completely over the other. Buck understood, walking back through the corridors of the Directorate headquarters, that the 14-day clock wasn't just counting down toward Vey's patience running out. It was counting down toward whether Earth could hold itself together long enough to face whatever came next as something resembling one people, rather than a dozen frightened factions racing each other toward different, contradictory answers. The 11th day broke the fragile peace. Buck was in Hure's lab, half buried in printouts of anomaly data that meant less to him with each passing hour, when the alert came through, not from the Directorate's own sensors, but relayed in a hurried, breathless burst from Deering's comm. Buck, get to the war room. Now. The Harrow's Reach just launched a full fighter wing, and they are not flying patrol patterns. He didn't wait for the lift. He took the stairs 3 at a time, Hure close behind him, and burst into the war room to find Okoye already barking orders. The hollow display lit up with a sprawl of red contacts pouring out of the warship's hangar bays in numbers Buck hadn't seen since the very first encounter. What happened? Buck demanded. I don't know, Okoye snapped, not looking up from the display. 1 minute we're sitting in the quietest standoff of my career. The next their entire fighter complement is burning toward New Chicago. No hail, no warning, no demand. Buck's mind raced through every possibility and landed, with sick certainty, on the one that fit. Vey's command structure caught up to him, he said. Somebody back at Imperial Center figured out the Harrow's Reach has been silent too long, and they sent orders he can't ignore anymore. Then where's the diplomacy now, Hure said. Where's the man who granted us 14 days? Maybe he's not the one giving orders anymore, Buck said grimly, already moving for the comm station. Get me a channel to that ship. Now. It took precious minutes during which the fighter wing closed the distance to Earth's outer defense perimeter, minutes during which Okoye's own scrambled interceptors rose to meet them in a desperate, doomed formation, before the channel finally opened, and Moff Tarnis Vey's voice came through, tighter and harder than Buck had ever heard it. Asterisk Captain Rogers. I regret to inform you that the terms of our arrangement have been superseded. Asterisk. Superseded by who? Buck demanded. We had a deal, Vey. 14 days. What changed? Imperial Center has taken note of this task force's prolonged silence, Vey said, and beneath the careful military precision of his words, Buck heard something close to genuine strain. Asterisk, a relief contingent, under the command of an Inquisitor dispatched specifically to investigate our disappearance, arrived in this system 4 hours ago. Inquisitor Veth Sarn has reviewed my handling of this situation and found it insufficiently decisive. She has assumed tactical authority over this engagement. Asterisk. Buck felt the floor shift beneath him in a way that had nothing to do with gravity. You're telling me you're not in charge anymore. I am telling you that the patience I extended to your world was a calculated risk that has been judged, by my superiors, an unacceptable one, Vey said. Asterisk. Inquisitor Sarn does not share my assessment of your civilization's potential value. She has ordered an immediate demonstration of force, intended to compel unconditional surrender before this situation can deteriorate further. I attempted to argue for the remainder of our agreed term. I was unsuccessful. Asterisk. Then argue harder, Buck snapped. You know what's down here. You know we're not a threat to anybody. You said so yourself. Asterisk. I no longer have the authority to make that determination, Captain. Asterisk. For the first time, something that might have been genuine, regret-colored Vey's clipped delivery. Asterisk. I would suggest you prepare your defenses. I do not say this with satisfaction. I say it because it is, at this moment, the only useful thing I am permitted to offer you. Asterisk. The channel cut. Buck stood frozen for half a second, the weight of it landing fully, not a betrayal exactly, but the bitter discovery that the deal he'd struck had only ever been as strong as the man who'd struck it, and that man had just been overruled by something worse. Okoye, Buck said, already turning toward the tactical display. What have we got? Everything, Okoye said grimly. Every interceptor we can scramble, every orbital platform still functional, and about 4 minutes before that fighter wing reaches engagement range. It's not enough, Buck. You know it's not enough. Then we make it cost them more than they're willing to pay, Buck said. And we buy time for whatever's left of that diplomatic channel to mean something again. He thought in the rush of the next several minutes of every old defense system Earth had built and half forgotten in the long, grinding recovery from its own wars, emergency orbital batteries from the early directorate years, mothballed when peacetime budgets made them seem an unaffordable indulgence, sitting dormant in scattered installations around the globe because nobody since had imagined a threat large enough to need them. Hure, Buck said, the idea crystallizing even as he spoke aloud. The old Meridian Array. The orbital defense platforms from the third reconstruction. Are any of them still operational? Hure's eyes widened with sudden, desperate hope. 3 of the original 12. Decommissioned, but never fully dismantled. We never had the budget to finish the job. If we could get emergency power routed back into them. Do it, Buck said. However long that takes, do it faster. The battle that followed was not the clean, heroic engagement Buck might have wished for in some quieter corner of his mind. It was chaos. Earth's scrambled interceptors, outmatched and outnumbered, weaving through Imperial fighter formations in a desperate aerial brawl over New Chicago's skyline, while civilians below scattered for whatever shelter the city's Reconstruction-era bunkers could provide. Buck flew gunner in Deering's interceptor once more, trading fire with TIE fighters that moved with a speed and precision Earth's best pilots could only partially match through sheer improvised desperation. Buck, we got 3 on our tail and nowhere left to juke. Deering shouted, the interceptor shuddering under a near miss that scorched along its hull. Hold on, Buck said, watching the tactical display feed into his gunner console. The 3 pursuing TIE fighters drawing into a tight pursuit formation. Hure, talk to me. Is the array up? 2 platforms online. Hure's voice crackled back, strained with effort. Asterisk, charging now. 30 seconds to first fire solution. Asterisk. Deering, lead them over the harbor district, Buck said. Get us in range of the array's firing arc. Deering didn't question it. She banked hard, dragging the pursuing fighters into a tight chase over New Chicago's Old Harbor, abandoned warehouses and rusted cranes flashing past below as the TIE fighters closed the distance, confident in their superior speed and unaware they were being herded. 10 seconds, Hure reported. The 3 fighters opened fire in near unison, and Deering juked the interceptor into a spiraling dive that put the harbor's old crane structures between them and the incoming bolts, buying just enough distance. Now Hure, the Meridian Array's first platform, dormant for decades and screaming back to life on emergency power, lit the night sky with a column of concentrated energy that caught the pursuing fighters mid-formation. 2 vaporized instantly. The 3rd spun away trailing fire, crashing into the harbor's dark water in a plume of steam and wreckage. It wasn't enough to turn the battle. Buck knew that even as he watched it happen, 3 fighters against dozens, 1 desperate improvisation against a coordinated military assault. But it was enough in that critical moment to prove something to whoever aboard the Harrow's Reach was watching the engagement unfold, that this world, primitive and unregistered as it was, had teeth it hadn't yet shown, and reserves nobody had accounted for. The fighter wings' coordinated formation began, for the first time, to fracture, squadron leaders pulling back to reassess against a threat picture that no longer matched their briefing. And in the high orbit above, aboard the bridge of the Harrow's Reach, Inquisitor Veth Sarn watched the unexpected disruption of her demonstration with cold, calculating fury, while beside her, Moff Tarnis Vey watched the same chaotic footage with an expression he was careful to keep utterly unreadable, even as something in his chest, against every instinct his career had trained into him, recognized the shape of a planet that might yet refuse to be conquered quietly. The Meridian Array's 2 surviving platforms had perhaps 3 more shots in them before their decades-old power cores burned out entirely, and Buck knew at the moment Hure's voice crackled back through the comm with a warning instead of a confirmation. Buck, the array's overheating. We pushed those platforms past every safety margin they were built for. 1 more salvo, maybe 2, and then they're done, permanently this time. Understood, Buck said, watching the tactical display as the Imperial fighter wing regrouped at a cautious distance, no longer pressing the advantage they'd held minutes before. Make them count. Below New Chicago's skyline bore the fresh scars of the engagement. A burning warehouse district near the harbor, a collapsed transit spire where a stray bolt had found its mark, emergency crews already converging through streets full of people who, an hour ago, had no concept that war could fall on them from the stars. Buck felt every one of those scars personally, the way he'd felt every loss across 2 lifetimes of fighting wars he hadn't asked for. But the fighter wing had pulled back. That meant something. That meant the demonstration Inquisitor Sarn had ordered wasn't unfolding the way she'd promised it would. "Vey," Buck said into the open channel, gambling everything on the hope that the Moff still had some authority left to exercise. "If you can hear this, now's the time to use whatever influence you've got left. Your Inquisitor's demonstration just cost her fighters and gained her nothing. That's not the kind of report that looks good for either of you." The channel remained silent for a long, agonizing moment. Then, unexpectedly, it opened. Not Vey's voice this time, but a new one, colder and sharper, carrying an edge of contempt that needed no translation. Asterisk Captain Rogers. "I am Inquisitor Veth Sarn. Your primitive defenses have inconvenienced my task force, nothing more. I would caution you against mistaking inconvenience for victory." Asterisk. "I wasn't going for victory," Buck said. "I was going for proof. You came here expecting an easy demonstration against a defenseless world. You just lost 3 fighters to technology my people built decades ago and left to rust because we never imagined we'd need it. Ask yourself what we'll have ready by the time you come back with everything you've got." Asterisk a bold bluff, Captain, for a man commanding 2 overheating relics and a handful of outdated interceptors. Asterisk. "Maybe," Buck said, "but Moff Vey spent 4 days studying my planet and came away uncertain enough to grant me 14 days instead of an immediate demonstration. You've had 4 hours, and you're already losing fighters to relics. I'd say his read on this situation held up better than yours." It was a deliberate blow, aimed not at Sarn, but past her, and Buck heard, in the half-second of charged silence that followed, that it had landed exactly where he intended. Somewhere on that bridge, Moff Tarnis Vey was standing in the wreckage of his own authority, watching an Inquisitor's first independent command decision begin to unravel in real time. "This conversation is concluded, Captain," Sarn said, her voice tightening. Asterisk, "My forces will regroup and resume the engagement on more favorable terms." Asterisk. The channel cut. Buck turned to Deering, banking the interceptor back toward the Directorate's primary airspace to refuel and rearm for whatever came next. "She's not going to back off," he said. "We bought time, not victory. We need that time to mean something." "Buck," Hewer's voice again, urgent now. I think we might actually have something. The anomaly data. My team cross-referenced the Harrow's Reach's last navigational logs against everything we know about gravitational distortion and stellar phenomena. And there's a pattern. A weak point, recurring on a predictable cycle, in the same region of space the task force emerged from. If we're right, it should open again within the next 6 hours. Buck felt something shift in his chest, not triumph, not yet, but the first true foothold of a path forward that didn't end in either surrender or annihilation. "Can you get that data to Vey?" "I can try," Hewer said. "But Buck, if Sarn's the one calling the shots now, I don't know that data matters to her at all. She came here to make an example out of us, not solve a navigation problem." "Then we don't send it to Sarn," Buck said, the plan crystallizing even as he spoke it. "We send it to Vey directly on a channel only he'll be monitoring. And we let him decide what an unregistered world handing him the answer to 4 days of desperate searching is actually worth. To him, personally, regardless of what his Inquisitor wants." The data reached Moff Tarnis Vey 40 minutes later, routed through a private channel Buck had no real confidence would even be checked. And what followed was, by Buck's own later admission, the single largest gamble of either of his improbable lifetimes. Vey received it not on the bridge, where Sarn's presence loomed over every decision, but in his private quarters, where he reviewed Huer's analysis with the same meticulous, methodical attention he brought to every problem the universe had thrown at him. The pattern held. The mathematics, alien as Earth's notation was to Imperial standards, nonetheless described something his own navigational officers had failed to identify in 4 days of frantic searching: a recurring gravitational anomaly, predictable, exploitable, offering his stranded task force an actual path home. It was, they understood immediately, exactly the kind of solution that could salvage everything: his command, his record, his 4,000 soldiers' survival. If he moved on it before Sarn's demonstration burned away whatever goodwill remained to make Earth's continued cooperation possible. He found Inquisitor Sarn on the bridge, composing the next phase of her assault with the same cold confidence that had characterized every decision since her arrival. "Inquisitor," Vey said, "I have received data from the surface that I believe changes our tactical calculus considerably." Sarn's expression carried open skepticism. "I am not interested in further delays, Moff Vey. Your 4 days of patience produced nothing but a damaged fighter wing and an unregistered world that has learned it can wound us." "My 4 days of patience," Vey said, with a measured firmness he had not allowed himself in her presence until now, "have produced exactly what this task force required from the moment we arrived in this system: a viable path home." He held out the data slate. "Earth scientists have identified the recurring anomaly responsible for our navigational failure. If their analysis is correct, and my own officers confirm the underlying mathematics, we have a window opening within hours through which this task force can return to known space." Sarn took the slate with visible reluctance, scanning the data with the sharp, dismissive efficiency of someone determined to find its flaw. She did not find one. Buck would learn much later exactly how long that silence stretched on the Harrow's Reach S bridge, long enough, by every account, for the weight of an actual way home to outweigh even an Inquisitor's appetite for conquest. "This does not erase the insult this world has dealt the Empire's reputation," Sarn said finally, though something in her tone had shifted. "Recalculating." "No," Vey agreed. "But a task force returned successfully, with a navigational discovery of genuine strategic value, serves the Empire considerably better than a task force that destroyed an inconsequential, unregistered world out of wounded pride and remained stranded regardless. I would ask you to consider Inquisitor, which report better serves either of our futures." It was not friendship that decided the outcome, nor mercy, nor any of the gentler virtues Buck might have hoped for. It was, in the end, the same cold calculation that had governed every choice Vey had made since his ship first tore through the sky above New Chicago, and this time, that calculation finally fell in Earth's favor. The withdrawal began 6 hours later. Buck watched it from the Directorate's observation deck alongside Deering, Huer, and a visibly exhausted General Okoye. The Harrow's Reach and its remaining fighter wing climbing slowly back toward the high orbit, where the predicted anomaly would soon tear open a path back to the galaxy that had birthed them. A final transmission reached the Directorate's comm array as the great warship prepared to depart. Vey's voice measured as ever, but carrying something close to genuine respect beneath the formal cadence. Asterisk Captain Rogers. Your world's data has granted my task force a path home it would not otherwise have found. I do not know what report Imperial Center will ultimately receive regarding this system, nor whether your world's location will remain unregistered or be flagged for future interest. I can tell you only that I, personally, will not be the one to recommend its conquest. Whether that proves sufficient protection, only time will tell. Asterisk. Then I guess we'll find out, Buck said into the comm, watching the vast gray shape of the Harrow's Reach dwindle against the stars. Safe travels, Moff Vey. I hope whatever you tell them makes this whole mess sound like your idea. There was, for just a moment, something that might almost have been warmth in the Moff's reply. Asterisk, it already does, Captain. That is, I have found the only kind of honesty that survives in my line of work. Asterisk. The channel closed. The Harrow's Reach climbed higher, gathering speed, until the predicted anomaly bloomed open against the black, a tear in the fabric of space that swallowed the warship and its escort whole, then sealed shut behind them, as though it had never existed at all. Earth's sky, for the first time in 11 days, belonged entirely to Earth again. In the days that followed the Harrow's Reach's departure, New Chicago rebuilt what little the brief war had cost it. A burned warehouse district, a collapsed transit spire, a handful of lives the directorate would mourn properly once the shock wore thin enough to let grief in. Buck walked those streets often in that first week, watching a city that had spent 5 centuries learning to survive itself, now quietly absorbing the knowledge that it was not, after all, alone in the universe, and that the universe, when it finally noticed Earth, had come within a single inquisitor's patience of erasing it entirely. The official directorate report, drafted by Hewer and reviewed line by line by a council finally united rather than fractured, made no attempt to disguise how close the margin had truly been. Councilwoman Marsh, true to her word, brought every decision into the open afterward. No closed-door negotiations. No factions racing each other toward contradictory answers. Earth had survived its first true contact with the wider galaxy by the width of one stranded officer's calculated self-interest, and pretending otherwise would only ensure the next encounter found them no better prepared than this one had. Buck found Okoye on the same observation deck where this had all begun, the general studying the ordinary, unthreatened stars with an expression Buck hadn't seen on him before, not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it, weathered and wary. "You realize," Okoye said without turning, "that we got lucky. Not clever, not strong. Lucky that the man holding the gun to our head had a navigation problem we happened to be able to solve." "I know," Buck said. "I've been turning that over since the moment he confirmed it." "Then you understand why I've already submitted a proposal to triple our defense budget," Okoye said. "The Meridian Array bought us minutes, Buck. Next time, and I think we both know there will be a next time, minutes won't be enough." Buck didn't argue. He'd seen the shape of the galaxy beyond Earth's sky now, however briefly. Vast, indifferent, governed by powers that didn't yet know Earth's name and might someday decide that ignorance had been a mercy worth correcting. Vey's parting words echoed in his mind more than he wanted to admit. Whether your world's location remains unregistered, only time will tell. That uncertainty had become, in its quiet way, Earth's new permanent companion, not a clean victory to celebrate, but a borrowed reprieve to spend wisely. Buck thought of every world he'd never see, every faction Vey had mentioned in passing that Earth knew nothing about, an entire galaxy of conflicts and philosophies and dangers that had brushed against this one fragile blue planet and then withdrawn, for now, into the dark. Dr. Hewer found him there as the sun set over New Chicago's rebuilt skyline, datapad in hand, the cautious optimism of a scientist who had just helped save his species still visible beneath the exhaustion. "The anomaly data we used to send them home," he said. "I've been thinking, if it can take a ship out, theoretically it could bring something back," Buck finished quietly. "Or let us go looking," Hewer said. "On our own terms, this time, before someone else decides to come looking for us first." Buck considered the stars, the same stars he'd watched go dark 11 days ago, heralding an invasion Earth had survived through nothing more reliable than one desperate gamble after another. He thought of Wilma Deering's steady hands on the controls, of Vey's careful, reluctant respect, of Marsh's hard-won lesson about the cost of fractured leadership, of an entire planet that had discovered, in the space of less than 2 weeks, exactly how small and exactly how resilient it truly was. "Maybe it's time," Buck said finally. Earth stopped waiting to be found, and started deciding what it wants to find first. Somewhere far beyond the reach of any directorate sensor, in the cold and patient dark between the stars, a galaxy that did not yet know Earth's name continued about its endless business. Empires and rebellions, Jedi and Sith, 1,000 worlds locked in struggles Earth had no part of, for now. But the door Buck Rogers had pried open, however briefly, would not close again so easily. And somewhere in that vast, indifferent dark, something was bound, eventually, to come looking.